everyone, and welcome to this next Talking Together Mental Health and Wellbeing event hosted by the IMechE in collaboration with the Royal Aeronautical Society and the IET. Today we have myself, Joshua Thomson-Smith, a member of the IMechE, and Bhavik Bhatt, a member of the Royal Aeronautical Society, and we are both young professionals at Rolls-Royce. We are very pleased today to be talking with Professor Jonathan Cooper, President of the Royal Aeronautical Society, and Sir Brian Burridge, who is the current CEO of the Royal Aeronautical Society. It's really excellent that today we can get some senior perspective from the STEM industry on topics such as loneliness, dealing with disappointment, and overcoming uncertainty in professional life, as you both now work together, but you do have different backgrounds and perspectives. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce both of you and allow you to let our members know a little bit more about yourselves. So we'll start with Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Josh. As Josh has said, my name is Jonathan Cooper. I'm the president of the Royal Aeronautical Society this year. In my day job, I'm a professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Bristol. So working closely with the aerospace industry, trying to develop new technologies for eventually zero emissions flight. Brian?
Thanks, Jonathan. Brian Burridge. I'm the Chief Exec of the Royal Aeronautical Society and have been for 2 years now. My real DNA is that of a pilot. I was a military pilot for close on 30 odd years, 39 years, I think. I then did 10 years in Leonardo, so deep in the aerospace industry, a couple of years consulting, and then I find myself here.
Excellent. That's really good to get a little bit of an introduction. So what we'll do is we're going to go through a few questions with you, and it's going to be really excellent to have go through your answers. So let's start with the first one. So how has your attitude towards mental health changed from when you started your career to the positions you find yourselves now with the society?
So that's an interesting question, because way back in the last millennium, when I started work, you never talked about mental health. You might have talked about people being stressed, but it certainly never got mentioned. Certainly over the years, I've known colleagues who have become overloaded and have eventually had to take 3-6 months off work, which I guess would be a mental health problem due to overwork. Not being able to say no, I think, is a big problem. I think with the sort of the advent of digital technologies and too many emails and social media, that perhaps has got much worse. But I think we're much more aware of it. So, and certainly from my personal perspective, I think I'm a lot more aware as I'm getting into my 50s now, trying to look after myself and making sure that I, don't become overloaded and overstressed. Brian?
Yeah, I agree with Jonathan's view, but I'm infinitely old, you see, and I well remember the norm, certainly in British society, when I was growing up, was this real sense of stiff upper lip, because the culture was, nation had come through the Second World War, a lot of privations, so people learned not to complain, as it were, and put up with things. And it wasn't really until, I guess, the late 70s where we started to hear the term burnout, and exactly as Jonathan says, this sense of being overrun by all the aspects, both professional and personal life, which suddenly, I don't know, seemed to increase, some of it about technology, some of it about expectations. And that was the point, I think, where people generally felt that there was a hazard at play here. For me personally, I was forced to take a behavioral science course way back in the early 70s, and that really aligned my thinking as to human motivation, how people tick, and the sort of stresses that can build up. And one of the problems, certainly as then a military officer, we had a can-do spirit. It wasn't done to say no. And many of my colleagues who reached the senior level that I did and then retired said, going into civilian life, it was very difficult to say no because you were used to just accepting it and cracking on. And that's quite an interesting comment on the way we end up. But certainly my personal view and my sensitivity to mental health issues has changed dramatically over the course of my career.
That's really, really quite encouraging to hear. I think, on the contrary, I've only been in the real engineering world working for about 5 years now. But even in the 5 years, I've seen a massive change in the perception of mental health, being able to talk about mental health a bit more openly. And I think it's important to do so because, as you mentioned, burnout is something that is a end result of not being able to talk about mental health. It's something that you don't want to be able to get to. And having an open space, a safe space to be able to talk about, oh, I'm feeling a bit more stressed today, my workload is too high, whatever it might be, prevents burnout from happening as regularly as it might have done in the past. Which is, like I said, is very encouraging. Even in the 5 years that I've been at Rolls-Royce, we have started many mental health initiatives. It might be as small as, let's just talk about it over lunch, or it might be a little bit bigger in terms of what are the effects, what are the symptoms of poor mental health, what can we do in the office, outside of the office to improve mental health. And I guess you also touched on the digital age taking over, social media in particular, doesn't help with people's mental health. There is so much stimulus nowadays that it's very easy to just constantly be turned on and not be able to go away from a screen even at night. And so I guess the second question then is, it's good to hear that you've been a bit more open about talking about mental health. In terms of your own mental health, where would you put yourself currently? Would you say you're currently in good mental health, or has the pandemic slowly drained away any optimism that you had at the start of 2020?
Shall I start?
Yeah.
Well, Brian, yeah, go on, Brian.
Yeah, let me kick off. And I mean, for my part, I'd say right now my mental health is pretty solid. I'm essentially an outdoors person, and so I have a natural cadence between the ability to use the outdoors as a de-stressor, if you like, in spring, summer, and autumn. But in winter, it's very difficult. Overlay the impact of restrictions due to the pandemic over that, and my willingness, motivation to get outdoors has increased dramatically, and has really helped. So as a matter of discipline, I always try to get some outside exercise, either on my bike or running or whatever, every day, and sometimes fail, but that's from a professional point of view, it's been a very difficult period because from a society point of view, we've had to downsize, make people redundant, which is never pleasant. And that has a direct impact, not only on their sense of mental well-being, but on the remaining crew as well. And that was tough. And now we're approaching the sunlit uplands because, like many organizations, we have been able to leverage the value of doing things differently, specifically digital delivery, for example. And we find now we're reaching all corners of the globe, which is always what we've wanted to do. So this has turned into an opportunity, and that's for positive. The one thing I really miss is interaction, the sort of bouncing ideas off each other, as you do when you go to the coffee machine, or just in a semi-formal brainstorm or whatever. It's the human interaction, which certainly to people like me as managers is what really motivates you, because that's how you get the best out of people. And by that sort of interaction, you can get a feel for how they're feeling. And this is perhaps a big difference over the length of my career, where it was assumed that people didn't have feelings, they just would get on with their job. Very different now, quite rightly, and this human interaction is a way you do tap into that. Jonathan.
I would certainly agree with that. I mean, I've been at the uni 3 days since March, a couple of days at Airbus. So again, it's that, chats in the corridor, over, meeting people over a cup of coffee. I mean, that's what really I miss. The students have had quite a stressful time adapting, but also the academic staff in preparing all the lectures in a digital manner. I would argue actually that this cohort undergoing teaching at the minute have got more material to be able to access. It's the structure of the day I miss. It sounds daft, but I miss my commute, because that's like a start to the working day and an end. So I normally do a park and ride into the centre of Bristol, and there's a sort of people you meet on the bus, not every day, but from time to time. And I get up and I go to spare room and I turn on Zoom or whatever, and it just goes on and on until endless meetings. So. And there've been a few weeks where I've sort of realised at the end of the week that I put the bins out on a Wednesday, but haven't really been out much. So it's trying to force yourself to get out. My whole family unfortunately caught COVID 6-7 weeks ago, but luckily we're all bright and well again now. But that has sort of knocked things out as well. So I think the long-term effects of COVID from a mental viewpoint are still going to take a while, but I can't wait to travel and go to meetings and won't moan about the traffic on the M5 or M4 for a while.
Definitely, totally agree with that. Yeah, it seems like night seems to switch to day too quickly these times. Especially in the winter. It's definitely something you need to get outside. So Brian, take a leaf out of your book, getting outside, having a walk or something. It's always good for mental health and well-being. So the next sort of phase that the interview starts to move towards kind of your career, and especially as young professionals who might be watching this, definitely anchored towards seniors to try and think about, when have you seen disappointment in your career? Because it's natural, we'll all face it. I have at some point, Bhavik, and I'm sure you have too. So the question is, what is your biggest disappointment you faced in your career, and how did you deal with it? And this is around kind of aligning with the amount of young engineers that may have lost summer placements, graduate schemes, due to COVID, and are left disappointed. What's your advice? How would you reference that?
So, thinking about this question, I wouldn't say there's one major disappointment. I mean, life is full of wins and some losses, and hopefully a few more wins than losses. But from not getting to the university that I wanted to get to, I apply for grants and I get some of them. I don't get some of them. I've applied for promotions and other jobs, and easy to say, but you've just got to sort of, brush yourself down, think about, did I, apply myself for that application or job as well as I could do? Did I prepare myself? But, you play sport or anything, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some. And you've got to be prepared for that. For young engineers, it's really tough times, but you're not going to get anywhere without, applying for things, look at, could I develop my networks better? Could I, perhaps slightly change the direction of things that I've applied for, but keep trying. Don't just say, I give up, and life's not going to come to you. That's one of the things. You got to go out, push yourself forward. You agree with that, Brian? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly, life comes with the ups and downs, and we do have to develop a certain type of resilience to overcome that. But I have great sympathy for the generation right now who are either just starting an undergraduate course or graduating. And I can relate that to my own experience. I was through advanced training, flying training, so postgraduate type stuff, and I lost my medical care. I had 18 months where I couldn't fly, and that seemed like a lifetime in your early 20s. In fact, I was able to put it to good use, became an ops manager, learned a new skill, actually developed confidence in another area, if you like. But I relate that to what's going on now, because there's no doubt that the impact on the aerospace industry is going to be significant for a significant length of time. Who knows how long, but if aviation recovers by 2024, which is what we currently reckon, then, you know, the lag in building up production rates, etc., will take some time. Balance sheets a week, producing new airplane designs, etc., will follow on. So there is certainly a lull. And when you're just graduating, a lull of 5 years seems like a lifetime. I mean, it is significant time. So I recognize that as, and the society recognizes that as one of the great perils that's facing us because of coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, brilliant. I think, Jonathan, you said it really well, that disappointment is something you will face in your professional career, but it's also just a part of life. And the main thing to take away is don't be disheartened to the point at which you give up. Learn from disappointment.
Learn from it. Learn from things that go wrong.
Yeah.
You know,
and adapt to the change that may come your way. And
I've just come out of a seminar from the ATI where they're talking about failing fast. So okay, that's not in a personal thing, but you've got to apply that to yourself. You should be reflective and assessing where you're going. You know, am I doing as well as I could do? But we're not all going to become top of the pile. It's
true. And as cliche as it may sound, for every door that closes, I'm sure if you work hard, develop your network, put yourself into a good position, a few more doors will open. And
but
then,
there are opportunities from the whole crisis. So I think the whole zero emissions has been driven up the agenda very quickly, and part of that is people looking at, well, what's going to happen next, and we've got to start developing the technologies for zero emission aircraft.
Yeah. And I think the next question kind of follows on what Brian was saying. Yes, there's a lull in the aviation industry, arguably across many engineering industries. But there's also exciting stuff happening on the horizon. And now is an interesting time for graduates who obviously they're thinking very short term, as opposed to what aviation will be like in the next 5 to 10 years. And they might be a bit hesitant to join the engineering industry or STEM industry in particular. Is there any point in your career in the past where you've experienced maybe some situation where you've thought, is engineering really right for me? Did I pick the right career path? And how did you overcome that little voice in the back of your head?
Yeah, I wanted to be a pilot ever since I was about 8 years old, and that sort of drove me in a particular direction. And I read theoretical physics as an undergraduate at Manchester, and I remember in my second year having severe doubt as to whether this was relevant to me. Solving fourth order differential equations on the back of a bomb have sort of limited appeal after a time. And so I started to look at other courses, and I actually fancied being an architect. I always said if I could not be a pilot, I'd be an architect. But then fate takes a turn, and the university offered at the end of our second year the ability to study electronic engineering, related more to computer science and the new devices that were coming on stream. And this is against the backdrop of a vast acceleration in the technologies that were applying to aerospace. And that period, the day I went to university, someone flew at Mach 7.62. And 20 years earlier, we only flew at Mach 1. So, all the technologies around that, the Apollo series, Concorde, all this stuff was going on, was seen as exciting, but it somehow had to understand how it applied to you and how you could apply yourself to it. And I think that it was lucky that I had that break. So I did a joint honours, and the rest is history. But it is, the intrinsic motivation has to be there, because it can be bloody hard work to make progress. And there is no doubt that if you look at it today, as you've indicated, phenomenal group of technologies coming at us in the fourth industrial revolution. Aerospace will be the biggest recipient of change of any other sector. As well as that, suddenly, or not suddenly, but progressively, the space sector is really taking off. And here we have the Artemis series coming up with another set of moon landings, including landing a woman on the moon. And that's only a waypoint in going to Mars. So, you know, this huge excitement that was around in the period when I was growing up is repeated now. And I think you can't beat the fascination of being part of that.
I totally agree, Brian. I mean, it's the getting involved in exciting projects is I think is what drives most engineers. You know, oh goodness, you talk about fate and life. You know, originally I wanted to do double maths and economics at school for A levels, and was categorically told, no, you do double maths, you must do physics. And okay, I originally studied maths, and hey, I'm an engineer, but I wouldn't have been allowed in without the physics. So some, you know, life throws up opportunities, the things you couldn't envisage. I didn't really know what an engineer was before I applied for A levels or university either, which was, I don't know, a sign of the times perhaps. But yes, I didn't mean to become an academic. You know, I did my degree and thought, ooh, being a student's fun. And then I did some aero engineering courses and got persuaded to come and, you know, do some work on ground vibration and flight flutter testing. So that was interesting. And then I met some people at the RE Farnborough. And then, why have you thought about being a lecturer? And I like the teaching side. I don't like marking, but I like the teaching part of being an academic. And I guess, every 5 or so years, I would sort of put my toe in the water saying, you know, do I want to duck out and go into industry, or do I want to, you know, would they have me? And, but, you know, I've always found more and more interesting projects. You know, I do a lot of work with industry, but not actually working in industry. And that's a nice balance. So I don't know. Did I mean to be an academic? No, but, you know, would I have changed things? I don't think so. So there we go.
That's yeah, it's interesting. I actually share a similar thing. I wanted to do English literature with maths and physics at A levels. My school said it wasn't possible with the timetables. So sometimes, yeah, it's quite early on that you have that path set. So yeah, no, really interesting perspectives. So our next question is maybe a bit more one towards what you do to kind of wind down, because that's really important for well-being. I do running, golf, watch Arsenal, which can be sometimes more of a stress. But anyway, yeah, the question is, what are your favourite hobbies to do to wind down and step away from the professional environment? And is there anything you do each day that you feel benefits your mental health and well-being?
I have an acoustic guitar, which I strum a few chords or more than a few chords on from time to time. I would maintain I can sing better than Neil Young or Bob Dylan, so perhaps your younger viewers won't know who they are, but anyhow, so I find that as quite a stress relief. I used to play lots and lots of cricket, but moving to Bristol, the ground was getting too far away, so I you know, to pick the ball up, not where the ground was. So I went back to something I'd done as a sort of Boy Scout, as dinghy sailing. So, but unfortunately that's been hit by COVID, although in theory this weekend I'm driving the rescue boat. We just about get around the regulations, and that's a great thing, because your every sail is different. You're trying to make sure, well, you're not capsizing, but then have I got the sails set right, and how am I doing in the race? And those are probably the two main things. I'm lucky to live within 2-minute walk of sort of open fields, so yes, going for a run, perhaps a bike ride, but I don't know. COVID has sort of constrained time in a strange way, and it's always a battle to find time to get out. Brian?
Yeah, that's there's a lot of commonality there. I've got a bass guitar, so we could form a band.
Oh dear.
Josh, can you play the drums?
The violin, actually. Yeah,
but there is similarity. I mean, as I said, I like to to get outside. I mean, A, you get away from a screen, and B, a lot of research has said how valuable it is for your mental health just to be amongst trees, etc. Well, I'm lucky enough to live by the River Thames, so I make sure once a week I do a dawn cycle ride so I can see the birds and things coming to life, and take my coffee and a piece of toast and sit on a bench and just watch it, and that's that's a great release. And I also have a boat, and so luckily during COVID I could spend a lot of time on the boat, suitably socially distanced from my crew, and that's just a great change of environment, great switch off, and it's very relaxing. People who chug up and down rivers and canals know that suddenly everything changes to 4 miles an hour from the speed of your life otherwise, and that's really good for cleansing the brain and just relaxing.
Nice, good to hear that you've got not just 1 or 2, but a long list of activities that you can use to help wind down. And I think for all of the listeners, it just goes to show that whether you're 5 years into your career or at very, very top levels, the work-life balance in STEM will always allow you to have this time to wind down, whether it's a cycle ride or a run or going on a boat or joining a band, which
well,
we'll see. We'll talk offline. The next question.
No, we talked. Sorry, just to butt in, but we talked about burnout before, and again, doing something totally different. That's, and again, I say I missed the commute, and that was almost like, okay, I've stopped work now. Now, being an academic, you can always do more applications, write more papers, do stuff, but you just got to say no, stop. And doing other activities is important.
That's one of the hardest things, because certainly for me, I permanently overestimate my ability to shift work, if you like, and then it can become it can generate a sense of anxiety where you think you're going to fall off a cliff edge. So really you've just got to get away from it and reset, recalibrate your expectations about yourself.
And it's a horrible loop, because I've got friends in industry with, before COVID, playing football as part of the team. Some people a lot of the time would say, oh, I just haven't got time. But if you don't give your time to give you that wind down, actually you'll be less productive. And I've read some papers on the productivity gain by giving yourself some time to look after your own mental health and well-being, whether that's playing football or
but you see people say, oh, I get into work at 8 o'clock in the morning and I work to 8 o'clock at night.
Might be less productive.
Look at all these hours I've done, but it's like, and I think it's something like, colleagues in Germany or France seem to be, do an awful amount of really good work, but they just seem to be a lot more balanced than we are in the UK.
Totally agree.
Brilliant. Thanks for your insights there. Next question is a bit different then. So as 2 very experienced people that have reached quite high up in your respective departments, what we are finding, especially with new graduates, is that people from sort of minority backgrounds, non-traditional backgrounds, people with slightly more diverse ways of living seem to be, like I said, in the minority, and they don't have a lot of people to look up to in higher positions, even in the mid-management positions. So it can be quite easy for them to maybe feel a bit lonely, feel like there isn't anyone that looks like them that they can achieve to be like. What could organizations such as the Royal Aero Society, IMechE, or various companies do to make the work environment a little bit more inclusive to people who want to be part of it going forward?
Yeah, it's a very important topic. And the title of this series, Talking Together, is really at the root of it. And so organizations, particularly professional organizations, have to be the catalyst that allows that to happen. And that's easy to say. A lot of that is about something we might call companionship, if you like, which is certainly the case of the way it would look for a branch of the society or one of our specialist groups, but the enabling that is the fundamental need to address the blockers. And we know what the blockers are. There's a very good program that the Royal Academy of Engineering have put together, which is a framework for increasing your appeal in terms of diversity and inclusivity. And I think that my personal view is that it's not that there are bad people who make other people feel unwelcome. It's just that we are probably riven with unconscious bias. And that is a significant danger for organizations of the nature of the Royal Aeronautical Society. We've been around 150 years. So our culture and our processes and procedures, which are kind of embedded in our whole being, are absolutely at the root of unconscious bias, because they just are not attuned to the breadth of community that we now try to attract. And it's important to us to attract a broad and diverse community, because I mean, apart from the fact that there's an ethical issue to it, but the difference of perspectives you get when you're solving a problem with people who are very different per se is remarkable. And the danger is that if you don't have that breadth of perspective available to you, you tread a very narrow path and ultimately a downward spiral. But it's interesting to see how that's changed over the years, because I can remember 25 years ago, if we were advertising for airline pilots, you'd talk about join this group of like-minded people, which is an innate barrier, and actually, in a sense, represents the very heart of unconscious bias. So it's breaking down all those things. And as I say, I have infinite faith in the human spirit. Only in a very few cases do people willingly put up barriers, etc. But a lot of it is just something that has to be recognized and washed out of people, recognized for what it is and what it looks like from someone else's perspective. So you only get that understanding by bringing a diverse group together and talking, which is where I began.
So I would totally agree with you there. And in terms of unconscious bias, you know, I've done quite a few courses recently, and you know, I'd like to think that I'm not biased, and then you start looking at these things and sort of looking at you from the outside, and you'll go, well, okay, it's just the first step is thinking about it. And even if you say there is a possibility that you or the group of people you work with will have this unconscious bias, is a really good start. And you know, I think my experience of seeing industry and perhaps working in, you know, various organizations, I think things have got much better than, say, 20 plus years ago. But there are still, you know, nodes of things where people are just, oh no, we are all the same. And, you know, if you're, you know, recruiting people and you're a bunch of 60-plus-year-old, you know, white males, you tend to be biased to saying that is the model we must recruit. So organizations like the, you know, the RAeS Society with the diversity and inclusion initiatives is really great, just raising these issues. University of Bristol, for instance, has set up you know, a number of support groups, and again, it's this talk. If people see, okay, here's someone who looks the same as me and has achieved this, it's just great, you know, because otherwise we're just missing out so many people that we could include in this, you know, for the great careers that there are in engineering.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, we were just awarded the top prize as a PEI for diversity and inclusivity, our action to address it. And in our submission, we also included some work we'd done on mental health, aircrew mental health in particular. And I think in many sectors now of professional life, we talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion. And if you think about that equality part, then that embraces a broader thinking about the results of what it is you're doing and how they're seen in terms of an individual's place in the organization and the organization's place against others. So if you think about it as an equality thing as well, and a lot of public departments now are putting it that way, I think that that gives you a much broader spectrum of both understanding and action that you need to take.
Excellent, yeah, and thanks for, like you said, around bringing up the series that we're doing here, talking together. Is the cornerstone of it is really bringing. We've had people from the LGBTQ plus community. We're getting our Rolls Royce. We have committees around minorities in professional STEM, and they're taking part and really trying to get all those perspectives in. So when the STEM industry is white male dominated, that's just a fact at the moment. So it's important that a series like this really brings together lots of groups, because everyone will have different perspectives on how it impacts them and their progression. So as we move forward,
it's also good to hear that people have started acknowledging that unconscious or subconscious bias does exist, and acknowledging it is a first step to maybe putting something in place that prevents that bias from, like you said, keeping this hive mind together, allowing diversity to expand. And it's great to hear.
Absolutely. And I think the next question is nicely sort of couples with the last one, is around nearly everyone at some stage will suffer self-doubt or imposter syndrome. And it's really, how do you deal with that imposter syndrome that you sometimes feel? Maybe that's because you look different, you maybe live your life a different way, or you're a young professional engineer who just is in a room and just doesn't feel like you belong there, even though you've got the degree and you've got maybe the internship. You just don't quite feel like you're fitting in. What's your kind of views on that as seniors?
Well, I don't believe that anybody doesn't suffer from self-doubt at some time during their life. Some people may appear, overtly loud and always confident, but I suspect that underneath there's this, am I really sure? I certainly have felt many times thinking, well, am I doing the right thing with my life? And should I be here? I mean, first time I spoke at an international conference, and there was 120 people in the audience, and that was really scary. And then I realized that the 4 top people in the world in my area was sat in the front row, which was even scarier then, because I hadn't really got to meet them. But you've, wherever you are in your career, you've got to try and use it in a reflective mode. Everyone's got to start somewhere. So, Brian and I were starting our careers some years ago. So you've got to almost say, well, okay, what did I find that if I look back at my career and think, okay, 10 years ago, I was really worried about this, and that's where I thought, but now look where I've got to. And so you've got to, I think reflecting on life and saying, well, these are the things I've done. And as you say, you've got the right qualifications, and it's just that next step of how do I apply them? It's like being a lecturer. I remember going to the first lecture being really, 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 really nervous, and happened to meet the head of department, who said, oh yeah, John, you're doing your first lecture. You got to remember the ABC and XYZ of lecturing, which was always be confident and examine your zip before going into the lecture room. And that was really good, because for the first 5 minutes of giving the lecture, Aircraft Structures 2, about, wing spar design, and me thinking, why on earth am I here? I was actually thinking about this other thing. So you've got to reflect, and not everything. Again, you're going to get some wins, you're going to get some loses, but learn from it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, there are two areas, I guess. One is reflection, as you've covered very well. The other is reinforcement. And to that end, that can be totally informal or perhaps semi-formal. By informal, I mean the sort of groups you mix with socially, you play football with. The exact corollary for me is on a squadron. You're still sitting in a crew room together, discussing the state of the world or whatever, and there's a sense of A, sense of belonging, and B, a sense of mutual reinforcement. And then in the semi-formal area, you can't beat mentoring. And that's why in the society, we are expanding and continue to expand our mentoring capability. For a number of years, we've had a specific mentoring platform available for female engineers. And now for young people, we're trying to build that up. It was one of the things that we said right at the beginning of the initial lockdown. You know, we've got to come out of this with a couple of things that are much better or that we haven't been doing. And mentoring for young people is certainly one of them. And actually our approach to diversity amongst young people is another. So there does need to be some structural sense of being able to find reinforcement. And that's, I mean, in any good organization, that's what the appraisal system will do. But a lot of organizations' appraisal systems aren't actually particularly well tailored to that. But if you have a mentor who knows you, who's been on the journey with you for a certain length of time, that's a very powerful method of reinforcement. And we all have doubts. And, you know, you can disagree with your mentor from time to time, but nevertheless, it's probably the best method I know of overcoming the sort of problems you indicated.
Brilliant. I like that, the two R's, so to speak, reflection and reinforcement. And I think in Rolls-Royce in particular, on the reinforcement front, mentoring has really picked up. Both people are more willing to be mentors and people are understanding the benefits of being a mentee as well. And it's, in terms of reflection, I guess it's quite easy to get caught up in your own thoughts and start overthinking, thinking, oh, actually, I could have done this better. Am I as good as my colleague here? Which is why the reinforcement is really useful to hear someone much more experienced than you tell you, yeah, this is exactly how you should be thinking. In fact, it's probably better to be a little bit more towards the self-doubt rather than the arrogant side of the spectrum, because at least it means you're there to learn, to continue learning.
But I have that, for instance, with PhD students who, you know, it's a 3.5 year course of study, like a marathon. And I know that the really good students, after 3 months or so, will say in a tutorial, well, am I doing enough work? You know, and I'm far happier with them saying that, because they probably are. Whereas the ones who are, oh, you know, I haven't got exams, well, it's 3 years away. So some self-doubt is good, but, you know, as with everything in life, within reason, it's a good thing.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. So then the next question is about the future. So you've spoken about how sort of the stigma of mental health has waned away. It's not completely gone, but it's waned away. So people are more open to talking about their mental health, talking about what they can do to improve their mental health. In the next 5 or so years, what do you think are going to be the key initiatives that organizations put into place? And also, what can the new younger members that are starting to come into the engineering industry, what can they do to continue building on the massive improvements we've made on mental health up until today?
Yeah, that's an interesting question in terms of the individual, but collectively, in many professions, the nature of work has changed because of COVID, because we found different ways of communicating with some working from home or whatever. In other areas, and that will be prolonged because it's deemed to be more efficient, it's deemed to be better for people individually. In other areas, and it's a question of returning, obviously, to the to the CAD/CAM and the production line. I think the first thing employers will have to take on board is the expectations of young people now. And we've done a lot of research in the society with the Royal Academy on Generation Z, and there are a few things that are the real drivers of attitudes for your generation. First is ethics. And so people will take a view about a company that they might work for on the basis of its ethical track record. Environment clearly is a major driver. And we were in one of our conferences recently to see the CEOs of aerospace companies, the CEOs of airlines, and everybody in the value chain between, absolutely clear that they were not going to let up any effort on meeting the climate change challenge because their staff demand it, the sort of people they want to recruit demand it, their investors demand it, and so they really have no choice. But it was good to hear that. And the other is a meritocracy. And that's interesting because a meritocracy will only work if people interchange, talk, interact, and understand the strengths and weaknesses, both collectively and individually. And that will be, I think, one of the biggest changes, because the expectations are very high. The idea of respect for hierarchy has gone completely. And some organizations will be switched on to that. They'll understand the drivers, and then they'll recognize the value it provides for them in terms of the productivity and well-being of their employees. Others will completely reject it. And there will be the area of danger where the expectations aren't met, the pressures come on, and individuals' mental health deteriorates. But I'm convinced that there is a real change in the importance which the good employers attach to the expectations of the young people they're trying to recruit.
And of course, that's going to be, really good for the company in that if the workforce is all, is working well together and people not suffering from overwork or mental health problems, it's got to be a good thing all round, but not easy. We've talked a lot in this conversation about the joys or otherwise of being sat at home due to COVID, but I think we're not going to suddenly jump back to the way we were. We're going to end up with some sort of blended way of working, and I think that's going to cause some stress for companies and also workers. Do we need all this expensive office space in London? Whereas people have shown for the last 6 months they can quite happily work at home.
And with that, work from home can mean different, like you say, ways of living and doing the day. Our final question is a little more fun. So, short one, what's your favourite comfort food at the end of maybe a harder day, or something that you go to when you just want to think, I'll go and have that because that gets me into a good space?
I've earned it.
Well, okay, so my sort of default, I thought about this would be like, some sort of flapjack or something, snaffled on the way home, which of course he shouldn't be having before evening meal. But talking to my two kids who are 16 and 17, and they immediately said crumble. So if I'm ever doing Sunday lunch, or it's like early in the week, it's a cold, miserable day, right? So my signature dish is like apple or whatever fruit is available, crumble. So I guess that's my real comfort food, and with custard rather than cream. But hey,
always with custard. Always with custard.
Yeah, that's an easy question for me. It's curry in any shape or form, any time of the day.
I love it. Yeah, because it is interesting. There's some science around it that comfort foods in moderation can actually uplift people's mental health and well-being because it links to maybe childhood and memories. And it's really quite fascinating research on that, as long as it's within a healthy and balanced diet. So, yeah, it's always a good question.
But we talked about, our mental health, and we've talked about getting out and doing exercise, but eating well is another obvious one as well.
Well, thank you both for really a fantastic insight into your perspectives on some of these questions around mental health and well-being, and coming together to talk together, which is the essence of the series, as professionals in the STEM industry and seniors. And it's really interesting to see how it's evolved and changed over your careers. And that's something that, especially people that watch this that are starting out, you've gone through this, and just like they will now, it's always important to reference people that have been there and done it, I suppose.
Yeah.
So great topics. I think we discussed around loneliness, dealing with disappointment, and also the uncertainties that can come with a professional career. So massive thank you from us, myself and Bhavik, for joining us today. Jonathan and Sir Brian. And if you've enjoyed this webinar, please do look out for more content in the Talking Together series. We've got a current interview that's going to be uploaded with the IMechE president, Terry Spall, so you get to see his perspective from another institute. And all the links can be found in the bio for all the other content. If you have got any queries or questions, feel free to email the institute, and there are support links for mental health and wellbeing in the bio as well, through the society and the IMechE. So thank you very much to all that have watched, and take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.